Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. We've talked a lot over the past 16 years about omega-3 fatty acids and how they actually have the ability to stop chronic inflammation on a genetic level. Not to mention, we did a show just recently that may have exposed why people who have inadequate levels of omega-3 fats in their body are more susceptible to heart attacks. Omega-3s are very important, and the standard American diet is woefully sad in omega-3s because they don't have a very long shelf life. In fact, one of the things that they remove from shortening, whether it be margarine or whatever, is the omega-3s because they actually make the product not last as long. That's part of the hydrogenation process as well. So we're going to talk today about certain people in our population that need to pay attention to omega-3s to a greater degree. And I love these kind of shows because we're not all the same. Even those of us who come from the same town in a given country, our evolutionary journey has given us a lot of different qualities that cannot be ignored. And so we're going to be discussing this today in just a couple moments. Before we do that, of course, I have to thank my title sponsor, and that's Legendary Foods. Legendary Foods makes the best flavored nut butters, no sugar. They make seasoned almonds that are the best in the world, but more importantly, they're tasty pastry. They can't keep them in stock, and I'm not just saying that. They've actually had to come up with their own production facility now because the company they were using to produce the tasty pastry for them couldn't do it fast enough or with the qualities that Ron Penna likes, consistency in every single product. And the tasty pastry started out as a Pop-Tart or an answer to a Pop-Tart, let's say, with less than 1 gram of sugar and 20 grams of high quality protein. Parents are buying them for their kids because the kids eat them and they love them. And they don't know that it's not real pastry. They don't know that there's not a ton of sugar in it because they taste so good and the flavors are outstanding. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 today to save 10% off. And all of the tasty pastries that we owed people went out about a week ago. No, this past week. I think it was Friday, actually. And we have a faster way to turn them around. So we give away boxes of tasty pastries on this show just for the asking. All you have to do is listen during the commercial break. And when you hear the secret word, email that secret word to onair@superhumanradio.net and include your mailing address. Because if I have to mail you back and say, what's your address? I may not do it. Not because I'm a jerk, but just because I got to do this as quickly as possible. We're inundated with these requests. So when you hear the secret word, email it to onair@superhumanradio.net. Include your mailing address, and we will send you a free box of tasty pastries. Why? Because we know you're going to love them. Everybody who tries them falls in love with them, and they are a healthy snack. So check it out. Now, without further delay, let me get my guest on. Professor Ani Manichaikul, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Did I get it right? I practiced it in my head.
Yeah, you said it very well. Manichaikul.
Okay. Welcome to the show. And we're going to be talking about omega-3 fats today. What made this study that you just published necessary? What work preceded it that there were unanswered questions?
Okay, yeah. So there was work that preceded it, some of which I did and some of which a colleague did, a collaborator who I didn't know before we did the study. So I'll tell you about both of those. The work that I was doing was basically in what we call genome-wide association. So we had done genome-wide association studies of omega-3 fatty acids in European ancestry populations from both the United States and people from Europe, and found that there are certain regions of the genome, or basically DNA variation, that show strong associations with whether people have higher or lower levels of omega-3 fatty acids. And the genomic region that shows the strongest associations with omega-3 fatty acids is located near a gene called fatty acid desaturase 1. So you can tell by the name, it's called fatty acid desaturase 1, that it plays a role in biochemical conversions of fatty acids. So that explains why this region of your DNA can influence whether you have higher or lower levels of fatty acids. And they're very, very strong associations, and people think this is because there have been evolutionary pressures on this region of the genome throughout history that because this region of the genome can influence fatty acid levels, maybe at certain periods of time throughout evolutionary history, that it was conveying a biological advantage to some people to actually have lower, maybe biochemically lower levels of fatty acid at that time. Maybe they could also get a lot of their fatty acids from fish, so they actually some people ended up with these lower levels of fatty acids. For that part, I don't know the details, but we can see, based on the differences in frequencies of these DNA variations throughout the world, that there have certainly been evolutionary pressures on these genomic regions.
So wait, I want to stop you there, kind of, because I'm a little ADHD. So if I don't get it out now, forget about it. So are these genetic drivers making these people malabsorbers of this fatty acid? Why would they need more, let's say, than someone who is genetically predisposed to accumulating these fatty acids to a better degree?
So I think it's not malabsorption. I think that these variants affect the way that people do the biochemical conversions between different types of fatty acids. So that's why they can influence whether some people would have higher or lower levels of some of the different types of omega-3 fatty acids. So there are different types of omega-3 fatty acids. When you go to the store and you see the supplements, they may emphasize that they have DHA, EPA. There's also ALA. So there are different types. And the genetic variants that we found in our genome-wide association studies, I think, relate to biochemical conversion between the different types of fatty acids. So like EPA and DHA come primarily from fish, but the alpha-linoleic, or ALA, comes more from those plant sources.
Right.
So if people efficiently convert the ALA to other other types of fatty acids, then that can increase their levels of DHA or EPA.
So from an evolutionary standpoint, and this is a big issue, and I'll tell you why. Because manufacturers of products say good source of omega-3s when it's actually ALA, and that's not a good source of omega-3s for some people because they don't convert it.
Right. Yeah.
So do you think that from an evolutionary standpoint, the people who were predisposed to be able to take ALA and make it into DHA and EPA actually never had any access to fish, and they evolved only under plant sources?
I believe that's definitely a possibility, but that's not the area that my research focused on. So I wouldn't talk about it too much.
Okay.
But I do enjoy thinking about that.
Yeah. I mean, because I had Dr. Daniel Lieberman on the show twice. Do you know who he is from Harvard? He wrote the book, The Story of the Human Body.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him during one of the interviews, is there evidence that people who evolved near water bodies ate more fish? And he said there wasn't, that they the opportunity, accessibility, but also convenience drove, just like it does today to people now. He said, no, he said they didn't necessarily, he goes, now, and that's not to say that there wasn't a portion of the population that learned how to angle and fish and did, but early humans may not have. And I think you talked about fecal samples, or the petrified feces that they looked at in caves and stuff like that. So
I mean, so this is something I don't know a lot about, but the interesting thing is, and this was something that preceded the study that we've just published. So if you look at a worldwide map, which geneticists enjoy doing, so if you you're interested in a particular region of DNA variation, you can actually plot the frequency of that DNA variant for different parts of the world. And for most parts of the world, the allele that's associated with more efficient conversion is the more common one. And there are only a couple regions of the world where the one that's associated with less efficient conversion of fatty acids is more common in the population. And those regions of the world, I think, are generally close to water. So one of those regions is sort of like around Southeast Asia and, around the area of maybe Indonesia, where they would have a lot of access to water. And the other region where we're seeing that the less efficient conversion DNA variation is more common in the population is along the coast of South America and also in Mexico.
Interesting.
So I mean, I don't know the reasons for that, but that's where we see that these alleles were at higher frequencies among populations that would have had more access to water.
Is it possible that those populations didn't have the need for higher omega-3s? And I use so if you look at Scandinavian people as compared to me, I'm very dark. It doesn't look at it on this lighting, but I'm very, very dark skinned. I need a lot more exposure to the sun to produce the same amount of vitamin D as a fair-skinned person could sit out for an hour. But the other thing is, even if I'm supplementing, because I have a lot more binding protein, debinding protein, I have to supplement with sometimes 10, 15,000 IUs to see the same elevation that someone from Scandinavia sees by taking 1,000 IUs of orally administered vitamin D. And so that makes me think maybe they don't need that much. Maybe they evolved to function optimally with less. Do you think that plays into any of this discussion?
Well, yeah. So again, we're sort of outside of my area of expertise, but I have had a lot of conversations about this with my colleague who's more focused on this aspect. And I mean, what we think is that these people, they didn't need to be efficient converters of the alpha linoleic acid or those types of plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids at some point in their evolutionary history, because they had access to a lot of fish, right? So that's what we believe.
Okay.
So maybe they didn't need to be efficient converters at that point in time. But currently, a lot of the people who may have had this evolutionary history among their ancestors maybe don't have a lot of access to fish anymore. So, they don't have that advantage of having more dietary omega-3 fatty acids anymore. But they still have this genetic background. So I
Right.
think that's where it becomes more of a problem, where, you know, your modern day lifestyle or the lifestyle that you're living now, for whatever reason, is not sort of aligned with what your ancestors were doing.
Yes, yes. And hence diseases of modernity, most of which are the result of us trying to do things that millions of years of imprinting says we shouldn't do. And
Mm-hmm.
we get sick. So let's talk about your study. How was your study designed?
Well, yeah, so basically building on what we had learned before, we knew that there were these certain DNA variation that confer either higher or level lowers of fatty acids in certain individuals. And we also, like I said, we looked at that worldwide map, and we knew that these DNA variation showed much higher frequencies in certain parts of the world. So interestingly, these DNA variations were at very low frequencies in Africa, which overlapped with some of our earlier work that showed that African ancestry individuals tend to have higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids. So that was the prior work. The thing that we didn't know, but we hypothesized basically, like I said, these DNA variations were showing higher frequencies in only a couple parts of the world, including the Americas, so in indigenous American people. So we thought that that meant only people in this who were having a lot of indigenous American ancestry would actually show maybe multiple copies of this DNA variation, right? So everyone has 2 copies of each DNA variant, one from their mom and one from their dad. If you happen to get 2 copies of this DNA variant that are associated with lower levels of fatty acids, that you would be at much more increased risk of fatty acid deficiency. So that was the hypothesis coming into this research. And then, you know, I have this collaborator at the University of Arizona. His name is Ski Chilton. He was really interested in the idea, like, you know, maybe we could find some indigenous American people and measure their fatty acids and see if they have really low fatty acids, because based on what we knew about the genetics, we thought that we would see such low fatty acids. But it wasn't possible to do that study because he couldn't find people in the Native American communities who were interested in participating in this kind of research.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of history about why, you know, Native American communities have had bad experiences with research, so, you know, didn't want to participate. So
Yeah.
my collaborator, Ski Chilton, had this hypothesis that he wanted to test related to Native Americans having lower levels of fatty acids. It wasn't possible to test it, so we had access to a different type of population of Hispanic Americans, who some of whom have a lot of indigenous American ancestry, and some of
Yeah.
whom do not. So that sort of allowed us to approach the same question in a different way, leveraging the fact that, you know, we could look at differences comparing Hispanic Americans who have more indigenous American ancestry and those who have less.
And when we talk about Hispanic Americans, we're talking about our neighbors to the south. We're talking about Mexico. We know that Native Americans, you know, governments have created these arbitrary borders that didn't exist. We know that Texas was part of Mexico at one point in time. We know
Right.
that Native Americans lived in those regions. And obviously, language being the definitive factor, it's the same genetics, just that one group maybe spoke Pima and the other group is speaking Spanish.
But yeah, so individuals who originate from Mexico are a major you know, contributor to the people that we call Hispanic American in the
Right.
United States now. But actually, the group of people who identify as Hispanic American are also very diverse. So some of them will, the ones primarily originating from Mexico tend to be what we call an admixed, meaning that they have both Indigenous American and European ancestry primarily.
Mm.
But those Hispanic Americans, for example, from the Dominican Republic,
What about
will
Peru?
have primarily African ancestry and European ancestry. But basically, yeah, if you look across Latin America, so you can see different types of individuals along these spectra. So, but we call them triadmix, because there are three major underlying populations. So the European, Indigenous American, and then African.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you see all sorts of different combinations among Hispanic Americans, which makes them sort of unique, and also so we had a Hispanic American group of individuals from a study that I work in called the Multi-Ethnic Study of Atherosclerosis. There were over 1,000 Hispanic American participants in our study, who spanned this spectrum of being triadmix, either African, European, or American Indigenous ancestry. And we saw all sorts of different combinations in this diverse sample. Then we were able to address the question that Dr. Chilton had about, whether people with more American Indigenous ancestry would have lower levels of fatty acids.
So what did you learn? What exactly did you learn from this?
So yeah, the major finding of our study is that the proportion of American Indigenous ancestry, which we can compute using people's genome-wide DNA variations, similar to how companies like 23andMe can look at those things.
Yeah.
So the proportion of American Indigenous ancestry is a strong predictor of lower fatty acid levels in Hispanic Americans.
So is this deleterious for them? In other words, when we're talking about this, I keep in the back of my mind, I keep going to myself, diet. I mean, the easiest way to raise those levels is through diet. So is this?
Yeah, I mean, we think that they could increase their fatty acid levels through diet, but of course, people would need to first know about their fatty acid deficiency before they tried to fix it, right?
Yeah. There's a company out there called Omega Quant. I use them, and they will tell you what your red blood cell level of omega-3s are, which apparently is like the important omega-3s.
Oh yeah.
So, but the problem is, a lot of these tests are done by us biohackers, and I'm using that word. I don't even like the word, but for lack of better choices for words, there's a segment of the population that actually cares about their health and takes steps to do things that science says is healthy. And that's obviously a changing landscape. With that being said, I check my omega-3s because I want them to stay in a good place because of inflammation and other things that omega-3s are good for you. But doctors I've never gone to the doctor where he's run a CBC and all this blood work and just checked omega. I don't know any doctor.
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of tests that it's possible to run, right? But typically physicians won't run all of those tests because maybe it's expensive, it's too much information for them, and they also maybe don't have specific protocols about what to do with that information, right?
So if you were talking to doctors, lecturing a group of physicians, what would be your pitch for why they should start checking omega-3 levels in their patients, especially their Hispanic patients who possibly have Native American genetics?
Well, yeah, I mean, there have been lots of epidemiological and also biochemical studies that have shown that reduced omega-3 fatty acids leads to all kinds of different health problems relating to cardiovascular disease, cancer, also has important roles in brain development, right? So
Mhm.
for those reasons, we know that having omega-3 levels in a healthy range is really important. Um, so not everyone does have omega-3 levels in a healthy range. In order to figure out which of your patients you should be encouraging to improve their omega-3 levels, you need to first have a
Yes.
test, right?
Mhm.
So you can check their blood levels, and if there's a deficiency, that's the point where you would want to recommend some dietary interventions.
But
Now,
see,
I think with limited resources, right, people can't sort of, the doctors may not want to do those tests in everybody, but if you can easily identify a subset of the population that's at increased risk of having omega-3 deficiencies, then you can target those kind of tests to those people.
but what most people are going to do is they're going to hear this show and they're going to go out and get an omega-3 supplement. This is something that's really
Mhm. Well,
interesting.
yeah, a lot of people supplement without testing, and I
Yes.
find that sort of unnecessary, right? Like, I have a
Well,
lot of
but is it
relatives and
dangerous?
family members who
Yeah.
love to go out and buy supplements and take them because they heard it's going to help their health. But really, if they haven't established that they have a deficiency, then they're sort of wasting their time.
But is it dangerous? We have a viewer, Craig Hollander, says animals that eat high levels of omega-3 fatty acids acquire yellow fat disease. There are many studies showing this. Now, I don't know if yellow fat disease in animals is dangerous, but can humans have too much omega-3 fatty acids in their body, and is there a negative consequence?
Yeah, so that's not something that I've studied specifically, but I would imagine that, it wouldn't be a good idea to supplement if you don't have a deficiency, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, pretty much for all the different metabolites in our bodies, including omega-3s, so there's sort of an optimal range that you want to um, maintain, right? So if you're either too low or too high, it's generally not a good thing, right?
Mhm. High doses of omega-3s. I learned this 15 years ago. If you take mega doses of omega-3s, I mean stupid doses, um, you will develop heart rhythm changes that can be very, very dangerous. Uh,
Mhm.
it's amazing how omega-3s affect the heart in such a pleiotropic way. So I would imagine that that's one thing. Corwin McLeod says, "What's a good omega-3 supplement? Salmon." You know what? I take omega-3 fish oil once in a while, and I always end up burping up the mint flavor or the whatever flavor they try to hide the fishiness with. But I have never ever burped after eating a nice half-pound piece of fresh salmon, whether it's
Mhm.
raw or cooked. Never ever ever. So I become very suspicious of omega-3 supplements. That
Yeah, I guess it's not clear sort of how well your body can metabolize those, right? Um, but in the fish category, so I think that the small fish also have a really good benefit because, for example, if you're eating sardines or anchovies, they still have really good omega-3 benefit, and maybe, a lot of people worry about toxins when they're
yes,
eating fish, and when you eat smaller fish, I think that you
they
won't
don't they
be
don't live long
exposed to
enough.
as
They don't
many
have
toxins.
the time to accumulate mercury in the same amounts as big fish. You're right. You're right. And that's why krill became so popular and all these other small fish.
Mhm.
I love
Yeah, so if you're a vegetarian like me, there are also, you can eat kind of algae or seaweed type things.
yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think what it is. We did a show about that years and years ago. There are some amazing things in algae. There's a red algae that actually has uh, a component that is a myostatin inhibitor. And for those of us who like to build muscle, myostatin is our enemy because it's trying to keep muscle is very metabolically expensive. So the body tries to limit how much you end up with. And anything that suppresses myostatin is more anabolic. So yeah, seaweeds are but then again, you have the same problem with seaweed. We basically pooped in the ocean, and now we're trying to eat the stuff out of the ocean. We've destroyed the ecosystem, and we're wondering why there's toxins in all these things that we used to be able to benefit from. But you're right. You're right. The small fish are better. Here, babies are born without omega-3 in the brain. So I was going to mention this later in the show. Let me just do this real quick. and they consider that seems ridiculous that all infants are deficient. That's why infant formula adds in these fatty acids. In fact, the majority of body fat loss from a nursing mother is to liberate omega-3s to feed the baby for the baby's brain. So the baby, formula is horrible. I was a formula baby. I have allergies. I was a C-section baby. I have allergies. My mother took Valium and smoked cigarettes while she was pregnant with me. So my body is already damaged. But any mother who can breastfeed but chooses not to is making a big mistake.
In terms of the babies being considered deficient, yeah, I mean, I think, people talk about ideal ranges for things like omega-3s, and I think what you have to keep in mind is that range that people think about only applies to a specific age group, right?
We're going to listen to we Hey, welcome back. We had a little internet glitchy.
Okay.
And we dropped the stream for literally like 15 seconds, and then we came back up again.
Okay.
Before we move forward, I have to mention something. We have a sponsor called White Oak Pastures, and they have the single best grass-fed, grass-pastured. I know this is not up your alley because you said a second ago that you're vegan, but
I'm
are.
a vegetarian.
Oh, okay, excellent.
I eat milk and cheese.
I found they have an amazing sausage, lamb sausage. It's called marghiz or marguez. It's a Northern African seasoned sausage. It's so good. And I'm 14% Northern African. I found out thanks to 23andMe. And so I fell in love with the sausage. It's great with breakfast, or you could just put it in a sandwich. I mean, it's fantastic. But the other thing that I found out about White Oak Pastures, I'm going to put their banner up over here for a second. They have bone-in chicken breasts. There's like 6 of them to a 2.5 pound package, very reasonably priced. And if you use the code SUPERHUMAN, you'll save an additional 10% off. I love bone-in chicken breasts. I eat a lot of chicken breasts, and the bone-in has such good flavor. The bone actually contributes to the flavor. We know this about steak too. Now you can get a bone-on filet mignon because it tastes better. Go to shrnetwork.biz/whiteoak and check them out. Use the code SUPERHUMAN to save an additional 10%. They really are an amazing company. Plus, they are visited by farmers all over the world because they have a negative carbon footprint, and they raise animals, they rotate their crops. I mean, it's just really the way farming should be done. White Oak Pastures, check them out. Okay, back to the research at hand. So these individuals who get tested and find out that they are lower than what is optimal, and let's say they start eating sardines and anchovies and the occasional piece of salmon, and maybe even start taking a high-quality fish oil product, how quickly do you think it takes for you to get back into it? Is it spontaneous because the more you eat, it's in your blood, boom, that's it?
Well, I think it would take some time. I mean, because the omega-3s play a role throughout the life course, right? So, like I said, it plays a role in brain development. So it's not like taking a supplement is just going to change everything right away. But I think certainly once you start taking it, then it's going to have impacts on inflammation, and then there will be downstream effects, hopefully that you would notice within a reasonable amount of time.
Now, is it? Are there some people out there that no matter how much omega-3s they consume, they're just not going to see an elevation in red blood cell omega-3s?
That I don't know.
Yeah. I wonder if there's like non-responders out there. I mean, omega-3s shouldn't be a problem, but the as I said in the intro, the standard American diet is woefully devoid of omega-3s in most cases.
Yeah, and the standard American diet is really different from what a lot of our ancestors were eating, right? So I think probably most people, no matter who their ancestors are, their ancestors were having much higher intake of omega-3s than they are. So from that point of view, I think increasing your dietary omega-3 can probably benefit almost anybody. But the reason why we're talking about people who are at increased genetic risk of deficiencies is because those are the people who we think should be paying attention to this the most.
So we're not talking about Cubans, right? When we talk about Hispanics in this discussion, it's the Hispanics who potentially have Native American genetics as well. So they're predominantly from the Americas, right? South America and North America, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of diversity among people who call themselves Hispanic Americans. So, one of the main messages I want to emphasize is that, we don't want to just classify people like, say, oh, you're Cuban, so you don't need to worry about this or something,
right.
Because it could be anybody. And also people move around. But generally, on average, we see that the proportion of Native American ancestry tends to be a lot higher in people whose parents and grandparents came from Mexico, Central or South America. That's where we
Right.
see the highest percentages. And so those are the groups that would generally be impacted the most.
I have to believe like the people from Peru,
Mhm.
and the Inca, what's the Incas, they're still around, obviously. They probably would be more prone to having those same genetics.
Mhm.
Maybe not as much African genetics, but more so Native American genetics.
Yeah, and actually in the genetic analyses, people have actually studied Native American groups from, say, like you said, Peru or Colombia versus other parts of the Americas. And in general, they found that those Native American groups from Peru and Colombia, they will tend to like actually show much stronger American Indigenous ancestry compared to if you go to some other parts of the Americas. Those people who identify with American Indigenous groups may also show a lot of admixture with, say, European ancestors.
Yeah, so really we're talking about a select group of people in the United States and South America.
Mhm.
But
Well, so for example, if we look at people who say their ancestors were from Mexico, on average, about 50% of their ancestry is American Indigenous. So that's, pretty substantial amount.
but the truth is, if you're eating a diet devoid of any omega-3 fats, I don't care if you're Basque from Spain, you're going to have low omega-3. And having low omega-3, we've discovered over the years on this show, is not a good thing. It's not a good thing. I'm going to put this up because he's passed away now. But someone posted something about Charles Poliquin here. Yeah, Poliquin stated that that omega-3s have been shown to be beneficial in every disease known to man. Well, I'm very cautious about those type of blanket statements, but anything that helps to regulate inflammation or inappropriate inflammation is a winner in my book, because we are highly inflamed today for whatever reasons, our diet, our lifestyles, the RF we live in, whatever it is. So I would tend to agree that everybody should be paying attention to omega-3s. You think that's too broad of a statement?
I think that's fair based on my knowledge. But again, what our study is emphasizing is that some people are at, even greater risk of omega-3 deficiencies. So those people should just pay attention even more.
And if you are eating sardines and fish, foods that are known to have plenty of omega-3s, you probably aren't going to learn a whole lot when you test, other than you probably are in a good zone. But if you're eating a lot of processed foods, lots of things in boxes from the freezer section of your grocery store, you probably are not getting near enough omega-3. So that this is a good message for everybody. Let's just go through a couple questions real quick. I don't know that any of us can answer these, but this is funny. I got to put this up. So I made a supposition a couple months ago that during the mating seasons of squirrels, of deer, and so on, you see a lot more dead male animals of the species on the roads, because in their fervor to mate, men don't pay attention that there's cars coming. They just see a doe and they run across the street. They get hit by a car. So I know what he said. He says a neighbor called animal protection on him for trying to substantiate Carl's thesis on high libido in roadkill. And apparently they wanted to know why he was poking the dead animals with a golf club. He was checking to see if they had testicles. Hopefully that's what he said. But yeah, I do believe that. I still believe it. I know that it's not a very scientific thing, but I remember reading a study years ago about testosterone and life expectancy in men. And there is a relationship between high testosterone and lower life expectancy, but not from diseases, from accidents. So what happens is when the male of the species is amorous, they stop paying attention to things around them in pursuit to find a lover. and they run out in the street and they get hit by cars. So that was my theory he was talking about. I don't know if we can answer this question. He's read that processed canned fish destroys the omega-3s. Any insight in that at all?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a good study to do. Has anyone done that study?
I can't imagine why. If you cook a piece of fish, it clearly doesn't destroy the omega-3s. Obviously, if you heat it too high, you could probably oxidize the omega-3s.
Mhm.
And canned fish is just boiled. Boiled in the
Yeah,
can.
I mean, I wouldn't think it destroys it, just based on my research area. So we've examined circulating omega-3 levels from blood tests in association with people's food frequency questionnaire data, where they actually report how much fish intake they had, and including fish from cans. And I think that, all types of fish were showing benefits.
So this is interesting. So, Poliquin took too much omega-3 and died very young. I don't know that that's why he died. Do you think that's why he died, Craig? I know he had a heart problem. He recommended 8 grams a day. That's nothing. An 8-ounce piece of salmon probably has 11 grams of omega-3. See, this is the funny stuff to me. We have physicians that say, "Oh, don't take more than 5,000 IUs of vitamin D a day." And they know clearly that if you spend I ride a motorcycle everywhere. I am so tan right now. I get a lot of sun. My body's probably making 10, 20,000 IUs of D a day. Now, it does destroy what it doesn't need. And that's the beauty of getting it from your skin. But this idea that, what are you going to tell people who eat fish for 3 meals a day? They live on an island. All they do is eat fish. Oh, don't eat too much fish. You're going to die from omega-3 poisoning. Some of this stuff just gets silly to me. It really does. Let's see.
I mean, I guess, people haven't done all those research studies. So I think, we have to sort of be cognizant of what we actually know based on research, and when we're getting into the territory of kind of just speculating, right? Because it's not really possible to research everything, right? People can try. If the question's important enough, I think we should work on it, right?
But do we need to research everything? Like, there's some stuff out there that we can look from evolution and say, okay, this is probably not that bad for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can use our common sense and sort of be within the realm, or like
critical thinking.
Yeah.
Bit, and I think that plays a big role in our own survival. And someone else said that Poliquin was recommending 50 grams a day. Like I said earlier, it was probably about 12 years ago. There were guys out there taking very large doses of omega-3 fatty acids in pill form. Now, again, we don't know the contribution of rancidity and mercury and whatever else is in the.
Okay. Okay. Sure. Okay. Sure. Mhm. Okay, sure. Sounds good. Sorry about the internet. Yeah, I'm sure. Okay. Sure. Okay.